Hello everyone, this is Michael Wolf from United Wolves Productions, and welcome to another episode of Behind the Lens. Tonight we have a change of pace, hence the change of attire. Today marks the first time we're going to be releasing a Behind the Lens video for our new series, Remembrance. As opposed to Roommates, Remembrance isn't an episodic type of series. It is a collection of 24 anthological short films that, in a broader arch and perspective, act as a series. So each and every episode is technically a self-contained short film with different characters, different settings, different situations, different timelines, that in the background they all have a similar thread that goes through them. I won't reveal much more about that because it technically will be classed as spoilers. Also, slightly differently to Roommates, there are going to be a few of those episodes, or a few of the short films, that have gone out to festivals that would have a slightly different look. Some of them would have an intro of their own, whilst others will have the intro of the series, although every story is self-contained within itself. Unlike the intro for Roommates, there isn't an overarching plan for these short films. We consider every one of the short films, every one of the episodes of Remembrance, a whole new thing, a new planning, new type of storyboarding, new shot list, new feel of the scene, depending on the situation detailed by our brilliant writer Dylan. So tonight we will exclusively focus on the first short film of Remembrance, also the first episode of Remembrance, entitled Retake. Funnily enough, Retake was the first thing that we shot at United Wolves Productions, almost a whole year ago. Obviously, since then, we have massively improved in terms of lighting, cinematography, editing, and all sorts of things, but you would notice even then the seeds that then grew up to be the high production quality that we have today. As with every one of the Roommates episodes, I'll be focusing on individual parts of Retake, everything since the inception of the writing, to the planning, the framing stages, the directing, breaking down of shots, both in terms of frame, decision in terms of directing, lighting, the editing process, and finally, as always, reviewing the final product and seeing what we could have done differently should we do it today. So without further ado, I give the word to our slightly over-exhausted writer. Dylan, take it away.
But it's been over a year, what am I meant to do?
You're a writer. Talk about writing.
Look, it's been a while.
I don't care what you say, just say something.
But
just do it.
The original idea came about as a result of the chess sequences between Charles and Eric in the X-Men films, and trying to figure out how to have an interaction between two characters where they are testing each other, both verbally and strategically. Trying to figure out what their moves are alongside a portrayal of fluid power dynamics based on the state of the game itself. Rather than the characters being equals, it seemed interesting to have them be a mentor and a pupil, highlighting the young blood eager to prove herself and the old guard defending his station. This allows her the opportunity to drive towards gaining the upper hand, while highlighting his ability to overturn the game as a result of his experience, establishing their relationship alongside setting up who they are so we can develop them moving forward. In terms of the script, it was a mixture of the first and final draft that was used during filming. Some of the things that were initially cut worked better with the revised work, and so we used the best of both scripts in order to form the iteration of the film we got at the end of it.
Thank you, Dylan. If you'd like to support Dylan, his film analysis and reviews, and his thoughts on current mainstream media, please consider following and subscribing to his channel up in the corner, BobLob V2. On our side of writing, we knew that Retake is a battle of wits. It was written as a chess scene, although the chess game itself was not detailed by Dylan. So we knew that we can have the symbolic nature of the chess moves both as the wits of the dialogue between the two characters. So I wanted to create a chess game that had the ability to be matching with the lines. The chess game was actually based on two already existing chess games. One was the chess game between Sherlock Holmes and Moriarty in A Game of Shadows, and the second one was its original inspiration between Bent Larsen and Tigran Vartanovich Petrosyan from 1966. The combination of the games allowed us to have the possibility for both quick enough retorts in terms of symbolicness between the dialogue and the actual chess game, but also in the actual finishing moves, it allowed the tension to rise slightly. Because had my character not beaten Zori's character with his move, she would have genuinely completed a mate in her next. The next thing I'd like to discuss regarding Retake is the planning stages of it. Of course, we have now the script, so we have to make it appear in our minds. We were looking at the objectives of characters, other than the obvious one of finishing the game, because there was an important wager. Now that wager we'll find out much later in Remembrance, but that wager has much bigger stakes for Zori's character, Carol, than for my character, James. So it's in Zori's interest, in Carol's interest, to win the game, but also to prove herself to me. The other layer on top of the chess was trying to uncover the way that we work. As Carol mentions, my character's way more secretive, very careful about talking about himself, which is something that we can explore much later on within the series. In terms of the feel of the scene, there's another thing to be said here. Because the majority of this, well, the entire film, is shot in a single location, and we're around a table so we can't really move about that much, then the variety has to come from the variety of shots that we utilize. We can't just have it on a reverse shot for 3 or 4 minutes because the audience will get bored. So we knew that the feel needed to be dynamic as a game of chess, and also to have enough variety of shots to be able to convey the different parts of the conversation, different layers as they go through. We knew we were going to need a wide shot showing the whole space. We knew we were going to need side shots showing confrontations from 2 sides of the board. We knew we needed close-ups of the actual board to know how the game goes, both from each perspective and from the side. A medium close-up, a mid shot, an over-the-shoulder shot, all of them conveying different feelings to the audience in a subconscious manner. This was shot in the Liverpool Medical Institution. They had a number of locations that conveyed what we needed: a place of knowledge, a place of age, a place of gravitas. So we thought that a place that had a lot of tables and all the library setting around us, this was called the Oak Room, but it had that very feeling of an age-old room, an age-old relationship perhaps, an age-old game being the decisive factor between what Carol gains and loses. The final thing to mention here, of course, are the costumes and props. The costume side of things might have come a little bit on the nose, but I was adamant of it to be as symbolic as possible. If you notice, James wears only black, with a little bit of white on his shirt, and Carol wears an entirely white shirt with a little bit of black on her tie, thus each of us being a representation of the chessboard in front of us. We chose then, as a symbolic contrast, to have me, who wore mainly black, to play with the white figures, and for her, who wore mostly white, to play with the black figures. And then at the end of the game, after she loses, she puts the black blazer on, completing the look. The final part here to mention is the props, other than the proverbial chessboard. It was a big discussion as to how exactly we would convey the memory containment. There was a lot of talk whether we should use a little bit more lights or a little bit more visual effects, but because we didn't have the budget for something more grandiose, and because we wanted something simpler in terms of how it looks to contain a memory, we decided to go with golden rods concealed in vials. The liquid inside the vials is actually hand sanitizer gel, but it provides that thickness and the little bubbles on the side that sort of symbolizes almost containment in amber. Of course, as with everything else in this story, the memories are going to become more and more significant down the line in other different short films that are part of the Remembrance series. Next in line, of course, comes the actual shoot day. Unfortunately, as a first shoot, it wasn't the most painless because we encountered our first big problem immediately after arriving on location. Now, this is, to be fair, it was completely on us. We did ask them whether there were any windows that could have impeded on our light, and they said that there are no windows. And in fact, there were no windows. But there was a massive glass dome in the center of the room. And unfortunately, although we were in the UK, it was a massively sunny day, which meant not only sunlight going through and messing up with all our previously planned idea of lighting, but also it meant that the sun was going to be changing, thus changing the actual lighting state of the room itself. How did we overcome that? We barely did. Unfortunately, at that time, we only had one C-stand, so the cleverest idea that we could do, really, was find a massive black piece of fabric that the location already had and create an improvised sort of tent between the closest wall to us with the books and sort of the center of the room. Now, this particular tent did not prevent sunlight from coming into the location, but it prevented it affecting both me and Zori in any major way. That, however, unfortunately, meant that the cinematic lighting that we had planned for the shooting day could not happen nearly to the extent that we wanted to. Overall, I think we did a good enough job of damage control, but you would notice in a lot of the shots that the practical lights that we set in the background are not very visibly lit. Also, you'd notice that there are not a lot of shadows. There isn't a lot of dramatic darkness in the background because, frankly, there was no darkness whatsoever. So what you get is the result of our first attempt to do something cinematic. And I'd still say we did a relatively good job of it. So, without further ado, let's break down the shots, framing and lighting of the first ever production that United Luz Productions did, Retake. Now, opening up, of course, there is the intro. At this point, we had only a small stabilizer, and you could tell in a lot of these shots, as they are quite shaky or on the shakier side. We also hadn't had a good enough grasp on slow motion at this point, so a lot of these shots would have benefited from that, but it was not in our toolbox, as it were. But we wanted to show the space, the books, the huge paintings, and in the meantime intersecting with shots of us setting up the board for our game. Because of course the actual short starts sort of mid-game, so we didn't want to confuse the audience much. Another point to mention as to why the intro is as long as it is because as a production, back then we didn't know it was going to be a part of an anthological series. Back then it was self-contained, small short film that we wanted to send to festivals. And as such, we wanted a self-contained intro to introduce the world of the short film. The last thing to mention before we get into the meat of the scene is that we really wanted to experiment with focus in this. There are, of course, some mistakes and things that are out of focus non-deliberately, but the majority of what's in and out of focus was an experimentation to see what we can push in terms of the attention of the audience, even to a certain extent of having half of the human face in focus and half of it out of focus. A lot of those were deliberate, trying to direct attention to see what we're capable of achieving. Now, we open up again on a fancy shot or a moving shot. not showing any of our faces up until this point. Once the move has been made and we've established that we're midway a chess game, we move up to Zori's face to introduce her on a very tight medium close-up. Unlike Roommates, because we have shot all of our productions on a single camera, what normally would happen is a lot of the lighting and the set around us would move when we move between different characters. So obviously I'll be breaking every shot on its own. The opening shot has been lit by the Godox on the front left, sort of creating a Rembrandt lighting on her face, and she has a backlight, again on the left side but slightly behind. The fill light that creates these sort of soft shadows on both of our faces was actually created by the M1 unit, being on 5600 Kelvin, which is daylight, concealed in a Chinese lantern. The Chinese lantern acts as a diffuser, thus it creates this very sort of soft light that falls on our faces, but it also mimics the lamps that were in that location that you would see on some of the wider shots. We then move to a side shot. You notice there that there is a practical light in the corner. Unfortunately, however, it doesn't give off much light because of the big sunlight from the dome, which is actually up there. But my face is lit by the Godox. It is now further back than where it was for Zori, and you'd see that the light primarily falls on half of my face. I have also a small backlight, which is more towards the entrance to the room, but I'll point that in a next shot where it was before. We counter that with Zori's side shot, similarly lit by the Godox, which is now, at this point, was on my side of the table. Her backlight can be seen more towards the right side of the screen, and also there's the lantern, which is sort of diagonal up here. You'll see the arrow. Now the side shots we only use in this beginning segment because it seems like we're establishing the two sides symbolically. We know that there's black and white figures on the board, thusly we represent the two kings, the two main figures, the two sides of the board, of the conversation. We then move to a low, mid/medium close-up towards my character. The Godox is close to Zori. There is a backlight to my to the left side of the screen. You notice that there's actually two practicals here, and none of them seem like they're emitting much light because of the sunlight. Unfortunately, no practical light and almost no studio light can match the light of the sun. Surprisingly so. But we chose that low angle both because of the power play between the two characters, but also so we can still showcase the figures of the board, thus keeping the idea contained around the chess game. Similarly to when we cut to Zori's mid/MCU, you can see the board. The Godox is very close to my left shoulder. Her backlight has been moved slightly to the left so my shoulder can hide it. Both of these, whilst not technically, they're not over the shoulders, but you can see still parts of us. We're still in each other's frame as we're still in each other's mind in the chess game. Then as Zori goes to make a move, we cut to the first close-up of the chessboard. Now in this way you don't see either of our faces, but you see the chess game and the piece's position. So if you are in fact familiar with the chess game, you could tell that this is an actual game of chess. We didn't need to necessarily learn an entire ending of a chess game, but we thought it would make it more real both for us, the characters, and any audience member that likes to nitpick. The entire close-up of the chess set is lit by the Godox, which is next to Zori, from sort of the right side of the screen, and a little bit of light from the Chinese lantern above. We keep on that shot for the next few moves, as both the lines and the moves correspond with the characters. And then we move to a mid-OTS shot. Now you notice that as we are closer now into the game and more further on in the conversation, we now start to take more of each other's spaces. It is, my shot is lit in the same way that the low MCU is lit, with the Godox being the right side, my backlight being on the left side, and there's a few practicals that don't emit a lot of light because of the sunlight. We correspond with a mid OTS towards Zori, lit in the same way as before, with the Godox on the left and her backlight on the back left, hidden by my body. And then we move to the first big close-up, or BCU. Now in this particular instance, it's because it is now the meat of the endgame, the middle of the endgame, where the threatening of a mate becomes ever so close. Now we cut to a big close-up of James right as he says his line, and right before he checks Carol. We cut to a BCU of Carol for the same reason, because she then defends herself. We move back to mid-shots as the game slowly progresses because the crisis of a mate is averted. Back to the board to show a few of the figures being taken as we slowly progress towards the end of the game. And then as Carol makes the claim of James's hidden nature, we move back to an OTS mid-shot showing yet another confrontation between them. And then we introduce one more type of a shot, which is a shot from slightly above with the stabilizer tracking her figure. Now so far obviously the board has been quite far away, but this is the pivotal moment of Carol checking James. It is an important moment because it starts Carol's plan of mating James, and unfortunately her demise arrives because of it. She's so focused on her own moves that she misses James's strategy. We cut to an OTS of James defending himself, and we don't match it. We instead move to a BCU of Zori. She's so self-contained that she fills the entire frame. She's sure she's going to win, taking the queen to even reminisce and gloat over her impending win. We then cut to another tracking shot of a figure, because this is the penultimate move in her big strategy. Cutting back to James's medium close-up because now we're expecting him to give up, as the hand of Zori enters the frame and effectively tells him that he has nowhere to run. James takes her hand, we cut on the motion back to the wider shot of the chessboard as he places her hand down, thus laying the dead soldier down, and makes his final move, mating her, and saying so on a big close-up. You notice here that James's big close-up corresponds with her medium close-up, because in this particular manner James has all the power, as he is the one who did the mate, so he takes most of the frame and she becomes sort of smaller and to the side. As she looks at the figures and realizes the mistake in her strategy, we then cut only for a brief second to a bird's eye view of the board. I'll explain why we only used it here in the problem-solving stage of this. We then cut again for the first time to a wide shot towards her, because the tension has been growing throughout the scene and we've been getting closer and closer to different details, faces and figures. Now that the game has finished, we can finally take a deep breath and relax, thus opening up the space. We'll match that with a wide shot towards James. You notice in both of these wide shots that the backlights are no longer that prevalent. That is because in a wide shot like this, the only place to hide them would be on a C-stand. But unfortunately, as I mentioned before, our C-stand was currently acting like a third leg of the tent that was keeping the sun from our faces and eyes. As the game is now completed, James takes a memory stick out of his pocket and starts cleaning it, whereas Carol's character thinks of a way to get out of what's coming next. She thinks she can get James to agree to another game, so she brings the attention back to the chessboard. Thus, the shots become closer again, as the camera gets closer to what she wants to achieve. Even though we've gotten closer, we still keep James on a MCU, whereas she's still in a mid-shot, she's still the small person, she's still out of power. But this time, the shots are not static, bringing slightly up the unnervedness of the scene. We cut to a big close-up of James, who had all the power, but then we match it with an even bigger close-up of Carol, because we need to see the importance of the memory stick. We need to see it clearly and what it does. You notice here, this is exactly the moment where I was talking about, that the face is half out of focus and half in focus, as she is in this dichotomous state, until she makes the decision of taking the memory stick, and then the whole face is in focus as she touches the stick to her temple. During some brilliant acting and alien sound effects, James, on a wider mid-shot, takes out the vial that would later contain the memory stick. We're then back on a medium close-up of Carol as she finishes up with the stick. And then we give the power back to James, who still occupies now a larger part of the shot. Because when we cut back to Carol, she's now back on the wide shot, back being very, very small. We contain James on an ever-familiar medium close-up, whilst we keep switching between different shots for Carol. This way showcasing that James knows what he's doing, he's secure where he sits, and Carol's character is constantly in different states of mind. We then give one final closer shot of Carol as she's about to leave, but if you notice, she's very isolated from the rest of the scene. While most of the other scene had any colors in, this is a very dark scene with the only light part being her face. Now she is in a dark place because she has lost something so dear to her, a memory. You notice that because this is a different shot, there's a slightly different lighting state. We have the Godox much further back towards the left and a backlight where she used to sit a moment ago. She delivers the final line, finally revealing that this was in fact a memory that she had to give away. Again, matching that with a medium close-up of James still being secure as where he is. And after she leaves, it is time for the final moving or fancy shot, in which James puts the vial away into his briefcase, showing that he holds many such a vial, so many memories from many people. He picks up the Black King, and then for the final shot, the camera stays focused on the Black King as he's placed back on the board, symbolizing the beginning of a possible new chess game in time to come. Whew! After that very, very long breakdown, it is time to very briefly mention the editing side of things. Now, there weren't that many problems per se, but there are a few things that didn't make the final cut. For example, we did shoot the entire game of chess, both from above, from the bird's eye view, and also as a close-up with the camera following every figure, because we wanted to intercut that with the rest of the scene. However, we did the very, very stupid thing to just mark the game, as in, all of us were doing the moves correctly, and were taking them correctly, grabbing them correctly, moving them away correctly, but because we didn't do it with the lines, there wasn't enough of a pause between different sets of moves so we can actually cut in between. So it would look like we were rushing the next move, when in fact we had lines to say and specific ways that we moved the figures whilst saying the lines. So unfortunately, none of that made the final cut, and it taught us a very important reason to never just mark things, but always do them fully. Another very prevalent thing that you'd notice in the scene is that we did actually very cleverly plan both the storyboarding side of things and the shot list. So a lot of the shots that you only see appear for brief moments were actually planned and only shot until those moments. Like the side shots in the beginning, like the wide shots toward the end, like the over-the-shoulder shots in different positions, especially the big close-ups. I won't ever shoot an entire scene in a big close-up just in case I need a certain bit of it. Every time I use a big close-up, it will be pre-planned and only shot on a specific set of lines. The only three challenges in terms of editing were, number one, where do we insert the chess shots? What do we sacrifice in terms of dialogue, as in when would the camera be away from our faces so we can focus on the chess game? And we decided that because there were two distinct places where both lines and chess moves coincided, we use them to showcase the chess game. Because although the lines were important, they were also looking like an attack and overtaking in the sense of the chess game itself. The second challenge was that I directed Zori to only hold the stick up to her temple and do the whitening of the eyes for a brief few seconds. So unfortunately, when we came to the editing part of things, because we wanted to showcase James showing the vial, we didn't have much footage of Zori doing it. So what we did was we took two of her takes and had her started with the stick on the first stake, Then we cut away to James taking out the vial out of the briefcase, and then we cut to the second take of Zori with the stick, slightly after it started, so we have a fuller idea, a longer period of time of her with the stick to her temple. The final challenge was Zori getting ready. Because it didn't take much time for her to get ready, we had to be clever about this. We had to add a rustling sound as if she was getting ready. We had to cut to me quite later on in the getting ready process. And when we cut to me, it was actually still in the beginning of her getting ready, thus giving the illusion that she needed more time to get ready so we can showcase both the stick getting into the fluid, which is what I really wanted, but also make it look more believable, because when we cut back to the wide shot, she's still putting on the blazer. This is, by the way, the only reason why there's a small continuity issue from where I hold the vial down here and then immediately cutting to my next shot when I hold it up there. We like to cut on action. We also like to not showcase change between shots. Change on the shot should happen in the shot. That was the only way to save both what was important to be shown in terms of the memory stick and the liquid, and also keeping the suspension of disbelief that she took some time to change. Now, in terms of the music, of course I didn't write this piece. This was Mozart's 40th Symphony, but I, using the software of Filmstro, arranged it into different themes, while still in the same key, still in the same kind of pace, so that we showcase the different parts of the scene. So I knew I wanted a singular piece to encapsulate the whole thing, because the game of chess is something very repetitive, although new. It's the same game that's been played over years and years and years and years, which is what I wanted in the music as well. I wanted all of it to be around the theme of Mozart's 40th Symphony, but in different instrumentation, with different added depth and movement in it. So you see that sometimes it's just chords played on a harp, but those are the chords of the symphony. Sometimes it's just the heavy brass instruments showing the tension of battle, or mimicking rather the brass of battle. Sometimes it's the full orchestral piece when showing a full fight. So although I'm not really a film composer, I tried my best to pick different parts of that theme and have them symbolically represent the different parts of the film. And now, as always, we'll finish the behind the lens video with me reviewing the finished product and seeing what we could improve if we wanted to do it again today. So definitely here the shakiness of the camera. Now we're with a better stabilizer, so we can definitely improve on that. As the music takes the battle and sadness. And here where the theme actually comes in for the first time, as the title shows on screen. Now immediately there is something not rather negative, but something that I'd happily improve upon. Because this was set to go for film festivals, we wanted it to have an intro, but the intro is 1 minute 20, and in a 5 minute 20 total amount of a film, so in a 4 minute film, an intro of 1 minute 20 seconds is way too long, and I'm sure that a lot of our viewers would find it too long as well and might even click off. But that's something that I'd definitely shorten if I had the chance to redo it again. It always is with you.
It's what makes me amazing.
Well, at least one of us thinks so.
I'll admit it when I beat you.
And you never let up.
They all say that.
I bet they do. Check.
Behave.
When don't I? Another little detail here is that we recorded quite a bit of foley sounds of chess pieces moving on the board. But in the editing process, it's not something that we focused on. So you notice that a lot of the times when we move figures, there isn't actually a sound that they make when they hit the board. And in another instance now where I just slide the piece over, you hear a voice of, and that's more on my behalf because I completely forgot to pay attention to that in the editing process.
I know what you're like.
I make no secret of my life.
Yet you're always careful when talking about yourself.
Maybe you aren't asking the right questions.
And what are the right questions?
That is for you to figure out. What? You think I have an ulterior motive?
You always have an ulterior motive.
Well, I'm hurt.
I'm sure you'll be fine. Check. Your mistake is thinking you have no weakness.
Another very, very small detail, but because I had recently taught Zori how chess players would normally take their piece with two fingers and then use a third finger to sort of switch the pieces into place. And this is on the directing side again. I should have told her otherwise, but there's quite a big jump with her already extended finger to take the next piece. It's not necessarily a mistake, it's just something that sort of stands out to me. Also, I should probably say, although I mentioned it much earlier, that if I have to shoot it now, having both two C-stands, and we would have gotten bigger diffusers, reflectors, and blackout sort of flags to completely dim the dome so that we can have cinematic lighting in this beautifully crafted scene.
Mate in one.
And yours is thinking I have one in the first place. Mate.
You're not even trying, are you?
I try.
You never take me seriously.
I'll take you seriously when you start taking yourself seriously.
Again.
When we've been so clever and careful of showing a close-up of everything that is important, this is something that sort of jumps up to me now. We probably should have had a small close-up of when James first takes the stick out. Because it just seems a bit weird that he has something in his hand that we don't know what it is, and then he just starts cleaning it, again, without knowing the significance of it until later. I don't think it's very jarring, but I think that I would have put another small close-up of that at some point. Now we have a deal.
One more time.
How do you expect him to take you seriously when you behave like this? Zori's decisiveness here is very, very good. And I quite like the alien sound effect that we found to convey the memory download. Better planning on the continuity side here for when she's getting dressed.
I'll miss that memory.
I'll take care of it until such a time comes you're able to recreate This final shot was an absolute difficulty in terms of maintaining focus on what mattered, moving between the vial to the bag, to James's face, to the Black King, and then staying with the Black King as it hits the board. Yes, other than the big problems with the lighting and the unfortunately impossibility for us to use any of the close-ups of the actual chessboard and the very, very long intro, I think we did a very, very good job. And clearly so did some of the festival circuits. The film won 4 awards. Audience Choice Awards from the Manchester Liftoff Festival. It won Best Sci-Fi, probably because of the alien noise, on the Falcon International Film Festival. I got Best Actor, again from the Falcon International Film Festival, for this very short but apparently layered performance. And we got semi-finalists on the Lonely Wolf International Film Festival. So we were very happy and content with our first professional production. And that is it for our first short and also the first episode of Remembrance. Join us next time when we'll be discussing the next short film in Remembrance, Reliance, my most dreaded film thus far. We'll also massively appreciate it if you could like, share, subscribe and hit that notification bell to stay up with everything we've got going on at United Wolves Productions. I've been Michael Wolf, and I'll see you next time on Behind the Lens.